Right. Let me see if I can find. So yeah, we talked about several times what it would be like to have just uh, a read-only free Jerry's brain, and then a replacement for the brain. Um, so I just thought it'd be good to get a ballpark on what that would cost from a development standpoint for those two pieces. So, and I'd thrown you a ballpark through Mattermost, just kind of saying, I'm thinking the read-only version based on what's already been done by Marc Antoine and the back end work that him and Pete have done is already there. So it's just really kind of a read-only front end. I was thinking about $1,000 at normal rates. It could be less if it's open source stuff and stuff like that. But just to give you a ballpark. And then I was thinking just ballparking around like 4K if we wanted something to where you, a single person, can go in and edit. So you basically never have to use the brain again in theory. So some caveats is it would just be your feature set, not Mark. Who's the Climate Web? Mark, which is yeah, Trexler. It wouldn't be all the features he uses.
Sure.
And maybe we'd also need to talk about one challenge thing is you do have some notes that are important, but that's a whole feature set for like 1% of your brain. So I don't know if that would be included in kind of the V1 read-only version.
Right.
Because I don't know what that would be.
And also a really important usability item is searchability. So some kind of quick search or even type down buffer kind of search through the namespace. Oh, there we go, search.
Yeah, so because they already have search built into the back end. So it's just a matter of from the front end calling that search. It may not be quite as fast and dynamic as, although the brain's web version was kind of slow. So between the read-only version and the full kind of Jerry writable version, there might be some optimization needed there for the searching for it to be fast enough for you.
Yeah. And when you're saying Jerry writable, you mean writable back out to JSON objects, but not back to the native brain format, right?
Yeah, or actually technically writable to the database that Marc Antoine has set up.
Right. The existing external database.
Yeah. So just to kind of verify the features that I thought that, so we could just step through these features and see if there's any that we're missing.
Yeah.
So in the brain, there's an up, down, and then a side. And then the brain right now goes an extra layer down, or not down, an extra layer outside of those three, like it does 2 steps instead of just 1.
It can, but I don't usually display that.
Right.
And
well, the one that it does display in the upper right, you tell people to ignore, right?
Or siblings.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
You're not able to turn that off. So.
And you can turn that off. I just like it there because usually there's interesting stuff that you can sort of go to, although it can confuse newbies because they're like, oh look, there's something over there, and it's like, well, yeah, but it's not actually immediately connected to what I'm trying to show you. So siblings can be ignored, yeah, for V1, and then kind of. I guess the way I'm thinking about this is like kind of it's a brain view utility over the exported brain data file, right? That basically lets you navigate through it.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, this may be easy to do, it may not be easy to do. Is it possible to create this viewer such that people could do CSS or other kind of UI styling on top of it to go play with the interface a lot?
Well, the way it depends. So I imagine this viewer would be open source code.
Mhm.
So it'd run on repo. So anyone who normally knows how to deploy a website, and it would be just, I think it's just Java. There's already a back end, so it would just be a bunch of JavaScript and HTML. Well, see, I might for speed do it in React, so you have to have a build step. I don't know if to think about that, but a technical person could take it and adapt it pretty easily. Yeah, so it depends on how technical that person is and whether they're familiar. So like Pete probably wouldn't do it because he's not that big on front end stuff. He could tweak it because he knows enough about CSS and HTML to do that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I'm looking to see whether this could create a little experimental space for UI play, right?
yeah, that's the way I envision it. And so anyone could take it, branch it, tweak it, and then deploy it, and they would be able to make the changes.
Yeah, yeah. And this would also give me, it's interesting.
Some of the questions, well,
go ahead.
I'd like to go through these features real quick if you don't
Sure,
mind.
please.
Make sure they're so kind of, you mentioned that it's important to have the animation, so when you're clicking on a node and it kind of moves out, that I'd heard you mention that was good. I want to be able to deep link, so you should be able to save where you are in the thing and share out that link.
And the animation movement is a nice to have, but not a showstopper. Probably deep links and search are probably showstopper-ish. Certainly search is a showstopper. Not being able to search means you can't really get around.
Right.
Yeah, the animation you can live without. It's just it sort of helps explain what's happening as you navigate around a little bit.
Yeah. Now I have the quick links at the top and at the bottom. I know that you use those a lot, but I'm wondering if you're using the brain to show someone something. I wonder if it'd be better to not. I mean,
so
if you sending a link to someone, those are a bit distracting.
Yeah, so the quick links across the top are basically pin things that are there until I change them. And I just put like major markers. They're not really necessary for use. Sometimes when I capture a screencast, I actually don't capture that top line because it's a little bit more information. It's a little bit confusing.
Right.
The links that are going across the bottom are a breadcrumb trail of what we've just been on, which is actually really interesting and useful. And so the bottom links are also nice to have, but pretty cool to have. And I would promote them, in the wish list. Yeah,
breadcrumbs
and the breadcrumbs could go any place. I mean, one of my wish list items for the brain is, hey, why isn't there a feature where when I start a call with somebody, I have a little time marker in the what did you touch list. At the end, I can say, okay, great, let's package that up and send it to somebody, right? Why is that not a feature in the brain? So we can then like, here's the excursion we took through the brain. You can go back to any thought that we were on, or hit replay and have the thing walk you through it.
Yeah, and I think that would be a pretty quick little enhancement that could be done once the basic interface is
right.
Those type of experiments would be useful.
Yeah, exactly. So links, node colors. The node colors. And I don't know if node colors were preserved in the export.
They were.
Okay, good. And the favicons are as well? I'd be surprised if the favicons made the export. Because when you go explore my brain on the web, sometimes the favicons are missing. Yeah, so I'm not clear about that one.
Yeah, that's a good question.
They're probably in the export file, but I'm not sure they reconnect to the thoughts at runtime.
Didn't work.
Yeah. And the favicons are really useful when you're trying to navigate around because they give you an idea of what's there and what it looks like and all that. But again, they're not fully reliable on each kind of way of accessing the brain.
Yeah, I'd have to look. I mean, so yeah, that might be a troublesome feature. So something that might push beyond the initial estimate that we'd have to figure out or
Yeah.
investigate before we did it.
And favicons were a new feature, I don't know, 15 years ago, 18 years ago, something like that. So they didn't exist in the original product, but it turns out they're a really useful feature.
Yeah.
So again, not a showstopper, but a really nice thing to have.
Yeah. So some of the things that would be excluded from V1 would be only one level, like you said, the sibling thing up there.
Yeah.
We're going to leave out the quick links at the top, notes and attachments for now. Now, I did want to note the positioning algorithm may not be as optimized as well as they have it. So, because they look at the shape of the screen and they'll divide it into a certain number of columns as they will fit.
Right.
And that could certainly be done, but that'll take more time. So the first version might be, going down or going up. Maybe they just grow off the screen and you have to scroll up or down to see it.
And they've got a bunch of time perfecting those algorithms for, it's a little bit like putting text on a map. Google Maps is relying on decades and decades and decades and thousands of man hours of research on how to do typography on a map dynamically.
Right.
That's hard work.
Now, it'd be interesting because I was thinking about using D3JS for this. So they may just all kind of spit out and that kind of rubber bandy thing to where they kind of find a way that they can all kind of fit on the screen.
Right.
It wouldn't be quite as easy to read through because there's no like left line to read down.
If the rubber bandy thing can be constrained in some way, so if you could go rubber bandy, but only south of this node, for example, then you could get child thoughts that way. But if it's rubber bandy all over the place, then we lose the brains up, down, left, right thing.
Well, yeah, so it would be that they go down and so you'd see the main kind of threads going down and the threads going left and threads going top, and they would be slightly constrained to those areas. Now for the sideways jumps, I think right now it always jumps to the left. I don't know, actually.
There's only a jump left. There's no gate on the thought that lets you link to the right. But if the thought is over on the left, then it looks like it's on the right. So the jump thought is funky, but it works really well. And so it's kind of a one-sided link.
I was thinking that it might be better to have those jump out to the right, and then they could, kind of like spider out. And you would see a bunch of lines spidering from the top, from a bunch of lines spidering from the right, and a bunch of lines spidering down. And then they'd kind of find a way to make themselves all visible, but it may not be as, as tight.
Is it functionally easier to sprout to the right for the jump links, or are you just saying that's an alternative?
Nah, I think most people read left to right.
Yeah, except the way I've been using the brain, like the fact that those links are on the left is sort of welded in my head somehow.
Yeah, we could definitely leave them on the left.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of it just makes a lot of sense to me visually the way it is. And for a newbie, they wouldn't care. But for me, I'd be like, it would suddenly be harder for me to navigate. Is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And that could also be a flag you could flip.
Yeah, exactly. And that could also be a thing that people play with the UI, with.
Yeah, but the first version will keep it to the left.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then for Jerry Writable, all this I think could be done in rather short order because the backend is already built, and it's just like creating a little front end using pre-built D3JS and stuff. Now, one quirk might be the breadcrumbs are only during your current session, so
I think is fine.
Yeah.
I
for
see.
the
There's no
car.
problem with that. I mean, this would be a benefit on top of the brain that the brain doesn't have.
Mhm.
If that was a log file of some sort that we could snip out and send to somebody.
Yeah.
So the breadcrumbs would be a good new function.
So yeah, so this kind of read-only version, I think could be done in, would be about, for me, it'd be about 10 hours. For a less experienced front-end dev, it'd be more like 20, 30. And then
Yeah,
they charge half of what I do, so it costs about the same.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Now the writable version, what I don't know is how important speed is to your data entry. I imagine it's fairly important.
Yeah,
So we'd have to
yeah.
make sure that we handle all the modalities that you currently have, like dragging and dropping or typing and searching, and that all is happening quick enough. And that's what makes it, I just threw out 4K as a big ballpark, but it could vary quite a bit depending on how sensitive you are to the quality of that data entry experience.
Yeah, exactly. So the writable thing is as you know, complicated. And one thing you just said is actually not really necessary. I do drag and drop from the icon next to the URL in the browser over into the blue area of the brain. I do that only because there's no keyboard macro. I haven't been able to figure out a shortcut that says, hey, what I'm looking at right now, just put it in my brain, wherever my brain is right now. And I would happily do that a different way. So I don't need drag and drop into the brain. When you're in the brain, you can edit things by dragging them around in the display. And I'm assuming that's a big deal UI design wise. And I don't know how much of a showstopper that is or is, to
So
not have.
yeah, it might be easier to figure out what your kind of minimum set is, and it
Yeah,
may not match the brain at all. Like if we had a plugin, I guess I don't know completely how a plugin would work, but it'd be nice to have a plugin where you could click a button and say, add this link to my brain. But then what's the UI for saying where in your brain you want it to be?
well, wherever the brain is right now. So first thing I do is switch to the brain, go where I want to put something. But a new UI would be much. You might have like a hypothesis bookmarklet or whatever. There could be a bookmarklet that just says, "Hey, add this to my brain," and then ask where, right? So I wouldn't go first to the brain. I would actually start the gesture in the browser and say, add this to the brain. And then it would pop up and say, okay, great. What do you want me to connect this under? And then, but that then means I need to remember or be able to quickly find the right node the right thought that I want to connect to.
Right. So yeah, do you think that would be as simple as a search and then a list of the thoughts come up and not really a graphical UI, and then you can click whichever one you want to hook it to, but then you have to say whether it's an up, down, or a side?
So that's a starting point. And usually when I add something new, I'm almost always adding under something. So it's always I'm adding to a parent. I pretty much never add a lateral link first, and I'm not often linking a parent above a child first. So I'm almost always like a startup fits under a category, a movie fits under a genre, or the book that it's after, or whatever. So pretty much we're kind of safe if we just hang things wherever the brain is in its current state, which is like, so the other way of doing this is I navigate to the brain where I know this should go, and then we do a keyboard macro of some sort that says, take the URL that I'm currently looking at, drop it in the brain under where the current state of the brain viewer. And that wouldn't be a bad default setting.
Well, if you had to pick one for the V1, which do you think would be more useful? Going to the brain first, or going to pulling up the website first and having a search?
My habit is going to the brain first, and then I know from that I don't always find the right place right away. So being in the browser and then having to complete the right search and put it in the right place from there is dicier. So I think that finding the right location first in the brain before adding something feels to me safer, both because I'm less likely to aim wrong and hit the wrong thought, and also it matches my current habit while getting rid of the drag and drop thing, which I really don't need and don't want. I do not like that for 24 years I've been dragging and dropping thoughts into the brain to add things to the brain. It seems silly.
Yes, so let's So the thing is, you would,
So instead of a Chrome extension, there would be a keyboard shortcut or some of some sort,
well,
or a macro.
yeah, we can't do a keyboard shortcut, because you've lost. So would you say, like, okay, so you're in the brain,
Mhm.
you have another tab open on your browser that says that's the link that you want to go to, right? Or the link that you want to put into the brain.
Right. So I'm in Chrome, and Chrome's usually in my browser. So I'm in Chrome at some site that somebody sent that I've never heard of before. I want to add it to the brain. It would be cool to have either a macro, keyboard shortcut, a bookmarklet, anything like that that says, take the current URL and plop it under whatever the current active thought is in the brain.
Well, okay, but I guess the problem is that how do we know what's the active thought? I mean, you would have to have the brain open in another tab, and then what happens if there's more than one tab with the brain open?
I would personally, I would seldom have the brain open multiple times. I would have one instance of the brain at all times. Now, there's a different use case where I might have multiple brain views open at the same time, but that's not how I use it. That would mean new behavior for me.
For now, it would be the easiest for me personally, just because I've done it before, is to click on the Chrome extension.
Mhm.
So you open up a tab to be added to the brain, click on the Chrome extension. I'm trying to think. Ideally, it would be so technology wise, I guess what I could do is okay, now I'm wondering also, is this Chrome extension going to be hard to get into the, well, I mean, we may not need it in the store. How comfortable are you with, have you ever side loaded a Chrome extension?
I have not, but I think I could do that.
It's
But
just like
also,
5 steps.
yeah, but also, the Jerry Writable is way thornier than read only, in part because I'm unlikely to swing and start using permanently some new thing that is just a tiny slice of partial features and all that. And I don't know that I can handle double entry of everything, meaning, hey, I'm going to experiment with Jerry Writable while also entering all those new URLs in the normal brain so that data file is continually updated. So it's hard, although as practice, it would be doable and easy. And then we could just overwrite the exported file. I mean, basically, I can do a fresh export into the database and we can just like start from scratch, right? That's no
Yeah,
big deal.
and yeah, it's just kind of get our hand around. I mean, what if your flow was you have a tab open up in the brain and we
In the
don't even have a
in the
Chrome
browser.
extension? I mean, what if you just cut and paste it into a box in the
A
brain?
dialogue,
Yeah.
yeah. That's the simplest way this could work, I guess. Yeah, is add child thought could be could bring up a little dialogue. You paste a URL, and then what the brain does, which may not be straightforward, I don't know, but the brain then goes and fetches the title of the page from the HTML and the URL and tries its best to make that thought pretty.
Yeah, there's several services that do that. And there's a way to do your own. We'd have to look at,
Right.
let's just call this app for now.
Mhm.
Yeah, so, and then you would also need a way to set color. And then you need to be able to Oh, so that's adding a new.
And actually set color only, and the default can always be white. And I'm just going with my current use case. The default can always be white so that there's no need to set it. And then it can just be a yellow button and a purple button in case I want to color one of those two colors, which are mostly the only two colors I use. Because another problem with adding colors when I use the brain now is that I have to bring up the color menu and pick the right little square from the many different choices. And it's like, I only use two choices. I don't need the whole color menu. So that would be, I think, more straightforward. Yeah, just change color more than set color. Right.
So what other editing? So that's kind of adding, and then I imagine you've added in there. Now you need to add siblings. If you're adding children, it would go through the add thing, and you'd use that as a parent. But also sometimes I
Right.
guess you're moving things around.
And I'm also I'm editing the name of the thought. So that's got to be that's got to be a feature. Is just to be able to edit the name of the thought, and then to add things around it. Exactly. And this is, and here it goes up, down, left, wherever.
I'm sorry. Say that one more time.
So once I've added a thought, then I add parents and siblings and jumps. It can go any direction at all.
Yeah.
So at that point, I want to be able to add, and connect to existing thoughts. So when I've just added some new thought, let's say it's a book, I would then connect it up to the genre of book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which already exists in the brain. So from there, I need to be able to do the search, the quick search to link to other thoughts, to existing thoughts.
So what's the process for linking to existing thoughts? Is it you have a thought in context, then you do a search?
So we've just added a thought and it's in the brain. Now I'm in the brain and I say, oh, okay, I want to connect this to a new parent, to an additional parent thought, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would do a search for what that parent's going to be, pick the right one.
Before you do the search, are you adding a button that says add parent sort of thing?
I think so. I mean, I kind of want to be able to add child, add parent, add jump.
So yeah, so you kind of like hit the add to add a child parent jump. You search for thought, choose from search, and it links it. So when you're like moving things around, is the flow okay rather than having some of the draggy droppy stuff, but having it to where you add a link and you delete the bad link? Is that sufficient?
Yeah, that sounds fine. Yeah.
So what do we think deleting a link would look like?
So that assumes sort of a visual representation where there are nodes and links.
Mm-hmm.
And deleting a link could mean you click on the link, which is then a clickable object, and you just delete it. There's a menu option to delete it or something. Another way is on the thought to say unlink from whichever thing it's connected to. And then you could just list everything it's connected to. And you could say break link to whatever. That's a different UI.
Yeah. So if we had all of that, you think that that would be sufficient to be useful? Or are there any other big chunks we're missing? I know it may not be short term,
Mhm.
but I was just trying to get a ballpark.
Yeah, but also the idea of having something we can experiment with is really appealing.
Yeah.
With the notion that, for example, if somebody has sent me something novel and I'm about to add it to my normal brain anyway, as an experiment, I could easily add it to the writable brain and we could play with that. With the knowledge that at some point we just overwrite the database with the fresher brain that I'm maintaining until I then swing to the new one. So that's doable.
So the other thing I thought of is kind of the next step past Jerry Writable is, and I don't even know if we want to discuss this now, but just how could people make suggestions to the brain that then you approve? And so the Jerry Writable, technically the base code would be, well, I mean, I guess theoretically it would be hitting, actually what I haven't figured out on the Jerry Writable is identity. What identity provider to have. I mean, I assume there's one built into the database that they're using. So we'd probably just throw you username and password in there.
You mean the database that Marc-Antoine ported into?
Yeah. I've forgotten what it is now.
Yeah.
Postgres.
Postgres, I think. Yeah.
So I think that they have an identity system in there. So we'd create an ID in there, and technically anyone that's in there would be able to have full write access, but it would only be you.
Well, this raises a really interesting question also about fork and pull architectures and super distributing my brain and a bunch of other stuff. It's like one vision for this UI is, hey, I'd like to recommend a link back to Jerry and see if he wants to pull it into the main line of the brain. Awesome. Another button could say, hey, I'd like to fork the repo and go off-roading on my own and build my own brain. And we had pieces of this conversation in early FJB calls. I'm not thrilled about like the super replication of my brain into lots of like crazy variants that I can no longer figure out or control. But on the other hand, like seeding a whole bunch of different attempts to figure this out is really interesting to me. And if there's a way of being like the Ur brain or the canonical Jerry's brain and keeping that identity by issuing an NFT around it or by digitally certifying it or notarizing it with a notary or something, I don't know, by having James Fallows write another article about my brain. It's funny, I'm back in conversation with Fallows because he wrote about my brain a couple times back in the day in the Atlantic. And it turns out that his new, I meant to mention this on the Free Jerry's Brain call, but I'll talk about it next week. But he and his wife went across country and did this Our Town Civic Foundation as a result. They've done a little documentary for, I think, PBS or somebody about their travels, but they're trying to figure out, it's really interesting. They're trying to figure out how to bring useful information to small town people so that they can pick up and go do stuff together, right? And go change their lives. And he was like, a lot of what you've got in there is very much along these lines. And I'm like, that sounds awesome. Sorry for the digression there, but it's really, really interesting. And so there's this, do we use GitHub's fork and pull architecture as a way of improving the brain over time, in which case it becomes Jerry's hive mind or Jerry's collective brain or the collective brain that happened to start from Jerry's brain or something else, right? Then we're in sort of other territories. The simpler way, the more normal way to do this is to put in a suggest link capacity of some sort that lets people put in a URL that shows up in a list for me, things to go check out and add.
Yeah, and I was thinking even the same UI as Jerry Writable, but data is stored in a separate table for approval. So they could even suggest, not that they're probably going to do it right, but suggest colors and what the parent and child links would be.
Right.
And it just stores all that in a queue.
Yeah.
So I don't think that would be too difficult. But then we'd have to have a UI for Jerry to approve and / or change. And that the actual kind of approval process might be a bit tricky, because I guess what it could do is merge one at a time, merge the change in, let's take you to that part of the brain, highlight the new piece, and then give you an approval or allow you to edit it if it's wrong.
And also, people making suggestions might have a suggestion about where to put it, and they might just be saying, "Hey, have you seen this?"
Yeah.
And if they're actually suggesting where to put it, and we have the Writable Brain UI, then all I'm doing is approving their ad. As opposed to if they're saying, "Hey, have you seen this?" Then I've got to go to the website, check my brain, and then do the ad.
Yeah, so we should allow them to do it. Although, I mean, if they're making a suggestion at the brain and with a certain thing in context, then we could probably assume it's a child of the one that they're looking at. Most of the time.
Maybe I'm not so sure. Might be.
I mean, at
But
least defaulted, so at least you may know going in that they didn't, that
Yeah.
they may not admit as a child, but this is at least the area of the brain they were in at the time they made the suggestion.
And by the way, this may be obscure, but one of my frustrations over time is that I can't connect, the brain's servers don't connect up to Google Analytics at all. So I get no information on how many visitors, where they went, what they did, anything like that. And I don't know if Postgres is happy with that or if that's easy to do. But if it were easy to do and getting some kind of descriptive stats from Google Analytics were possible, that would be a really big win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and also, do you want the brain to be searchable on Google?
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. Which might and completely affect choice of database, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And
So
I have no wisdom on what databases are in fact presently searchable through Google.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, if we don't tell it not to, Google is getting complex enough that they do, well, we'd still have to have links. They could still crawl it, even though it's a web application, and even though I haven't made it crawlable, because they're starting to do that. I don't think it reaches as high of a thing. The other thing is to build out a full static side of the whole brain, right? So
Right.
a page
Right.
for every thing, which would be quite a bit of work. So I imagine that wouldn't be anything we'd want really soon, but I also wasn't sure whether you even wanted it to show up in Google searches yet.
I would love if it showed up in Google searches. That'd be fantastic. That would truly be fantastic. I would love that.
The other challenge with that is that because you're moving around in nodes in a network graph, that one piece of text shows up, if it's linked to 10 things, it shows up on technically 10 pages. And
Right.
Google does have this thing where they demote you if you have repeated data.
Yeah. Oh, we have to figure out how to fit within the Google algorithms.
And then if it's not repeated data, I mean, maybe we're just telling Google, hey, this main thing is the only thing that's indexable on this page.
Right.
And then it shows up all the other stuff. But we'll probably have to save that for later. But yeah, Google Analytics, I don't think it's that hard. What I don't know is how complicated it is to hook up Google Analytics to a React. I don't think it's that hard. I think it will track all the UI. So maybe that is something that we could literally just turn on.
Yeah. And early on in our architectural conversations about freeing my brain, we talked about, or I was really interested in, why is the brain not more like HTML, where I click on a link to see a new web page, and then a call goes out to servers around the world to send me materials to show up in my browser. My browser then assembles them and does its best and shows me the page. And the browser is indifferent as to how far away the servers were. And so
Yeah.
why can't brain tuples or nodes or whatever they are, RDF tuple, I don't know, and this is
Mhm.
way beyond my pay grade, why can't they just live on servers anyplace, right? As opposed to being in a database. Now, being in a database makes search much easier, that's for damn sure, but also it centralizes the whole thing. And if you start having access control over tuples that live anywhere, then they're just documents, and Google might happily search them, and it might also have no idea what to do with them because they're novel pieces that only make sense when they're joined by the view that unifies several different nodes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
It's yeah, I've thought through that architecture. I think it's definitely possible. I mean, I should be able to host a I guess what it would be is like, here's my title, and here's links to all of its parents, children, and sides, and those could just be URLs,
Mhm.
and they don't actually even have the title or description, and it could go get those from those links. Or if I want to maintain those, maybe I could include the actual title that I wanted to be represented in on my node in that link. And then yeah, there would be instead of the browser going to that page and rendering it as is, um, I mean, it could work where it would render, but I might have a plugin or have some JavaScript that would run, that would then spider out and check all the link endpoints. Yeah, well, no, actually, you could make it towards a little JavaScript thing. And as you go to each page, it just shows its local neighborhood and then links to the next page, which is a different local neighborhood.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's kind of doable. But yeah,
That's a couple of steps away from where we are.
yeah,
But these things get complicated and interesting the moment we start thinking about different sort of use cases and different data structures and all that.
yeah,
And then I was thinking that if you're curating a new free brain like thing as well as me, then, and we both point to the Disneyland website, does the node that contains the Disneyland links then have access controls that reveal it as slightly different for you than for me, because you added some personal notes that shouldn't be visible to me, but we're both curating the same node in this new linked open data
yeah.
infrastructure.
And if y'all didn't,
That's
yeah, and if y'all didn't
yeah.
even intend, like if you just happen to both have the same link in your brains, should the UI be able to show these are Jerry's links and these are my links, and here's if they're overlapped, then they would be the same
Well,
link.
pretend you and I had been building separate brains for years and then met and then decided to meld our brains. There could be a way to just make, a set operator that says, okay, now make all of each, make the other person's links visible to you and your view. And you could be like, oh, wow, okay, here, we have all, and then stats would come up that would say, you have, 20,000 links that are in common, which you seem, they're the identical link you both put in, of which 60% are named identically, but 40% are named differently. Here's the differences, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it gets complicated fast, but it's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to make just trying to think how you do that. I guess you could even have it to where the software running on both the sites, the person could say, hey, I want to combine this view of the brain and view it with this other one and just put in a URL to the other brain.
Right.
And it would go through it and link everything up visually on the screen, and differentiate them somehow visually.
Right.
Okay, so I think the read only is still, so it would be this, and then these would be kind of the bonus items depending on how easy they are.
Right.
And these are the things would be in future versions.
Makes total sense.
And then, if we wanted to go further, then you could do a Jerry writable with the caveat that we'd be playing with it until, it'd be kind of like dummy data until if and when it ever gets up to it sufficient enough for you to use to leave the brain. But
Yeah.
I don't know if it ever would. So I don't know how much it'd be worth.
Well, I think the
Testing
first,
that.
I think the first piece is like, let's go ahead and play with that. Let's do the read, let's do read only, and see what that does and how that feels.
Okay. So, yeah. So how does is like $1,000 for something like that? Is that a reasonable thing? Do you want to go find funding for it?
So I have a little bit of budget left from the RUT grant, which is meant in part for things exactly like this. So I would say, for $1,000 I can fund from it. If we get up to 5,000, then I can't do that and fund other sorts of stuff.
Right.
Because I'm drawing down, and I haven't gone back to Jim Rep because I haven't finished Weaving the World podcast and all that kind of stuff. So still stuck on that. But happy to do this, and that means that you will submit I've got a form that is the grant with a fund withdrawal request form that you fill out to Lionsburg, which is holding the funds for OGM.
Okay.
So that's how you get paid, but that'll work.
Okay. Yeah. So you're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Deadlines. You're not in a rush for this?
Been waiting a couple of years for us to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So
what's another couple of years? I mean, no, I'm thinking, with everything else going on, even though it's just like I said, 10 hours. But finding a week with 10 hours, and I might ask a junior dev that I know to help out but so I'm thinking it might take up a month.
Okay.
Is that not scary?
If you make it's not scary, and if you make progress, let me know. I mean, along the way.
Yeah. But, I definitely like showing on the way, because I'd almost like to start showing you the up, down, left.
I'm going to point out that the
early.
month we're about to enter is 3 days shorter than your normal month.
Well, notice I didn't put an actual date on here. T-minus 30 month-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so and you'll send me a link to that form for the Lionsburg?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions or concerns we want to talk about this project?
No, this is lovely, and what you're saying makes sense, and also I think it'll paint itself more vividly in my head when you've got something to demo, and that'll be progress. That'll feel really good, and then we report that back to Free Jerry's Brain and say, like, here's what's up.
Yeah, and if anyone really wants to help out, we could probably coordinate something, and I'll post this on my YouTube channel and share you a link on Mattermost so you can post it on the Free Jerry Brain.
That sounds great.
Cool. Well, glad we could get together. Should be fun.
Yeah.
Should be a fun project to see something actually materialize out of all this hard work everyone's been doing.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Great idea and good thing.
All right. Talk to you next time.
All right.